In 2016, Pope Francis did something that no other pope had done before. And in this one case, thanks be to God, it was the first time ever the Church had written any kind of encyclical or document on the religious lay brother. It had never ever been done before in the history of the Church where there was an encyclical on the religious brother. There were encyclicals on religious life, there were encyclicals on contemplative life and so forth, and all kinds of documents on religious life in general, or geared towards particular communities or particular ways of life, but never about the vocation to the lay brother state of life. And you often don't hear much about the vocation of a lay brother. And unfortunately, because of our particular culture today, it's even worse. The lay brothers are members of the community, the religious communities, who have a particular place by their consecration. And in our contemporary culture, there is no room for that. If they're not doing things, they're therefore not important, is the attitude of the world. And I don't mean doing things like doing things that the world sees worth doing. Let me back up and explain this. Why is it difficult for young men or men when they enter religious life to remain a lay brother? Because even among church people who are faithful to the church, they don't value the life of a lay brother. And so the first question that a lay brother is often asked when they say, "Oh, I'm brother so-and-so," they ask, "Oh, are you going to become a priest?" And then they'll say no, and they'll say, "Oh, you're just a brother." Just a brother. Or only a brother, as if being a brother is less than the priesthood. Which is really bad theology, because according to Thomas Aquinas and others, the state of religious life is actually a higher state than the priesthood. The priesthood is a vocation within the vocation for the religious. It is for the functioning of the distribution of the sacraments. When a man is called to be a priest, he's called forth from the people by God, trained by the church, discerned by the church, for the functions of the church. If there's any functional vocation, the functional vocation is that of a priest, because his job and his ministry is to distribute the sacraments, to teach, to govern, and sanctify. But not all men are called to the priesthood. There is a particular, vocation to that ministry, but not all men are called to that. It does require studies and so forth, and not all men can handle the amount of studies, but also the pastoral work. Not all can handle the pastoral work. So not all are called to it. Not just because they can't handle it and aren't gifted, but God has another thing for them. That particular ministry, that particular life in the church as a priest is not for those men. And so often when young men enter religious life, even in their own minds, the thought is they're going to become priests. And I would often say to them, maybe, maybe not. Because the vocation, when one enters religious life, is not to become a priest, unless it's an order of priest. It is the vocation to that charism of that particular way of life. Whether one is a Dominican, a Jesuit, a Franciscan, a Trappist, or Benedictine, you begin your novitiate with that understanding that you've come to live that particular way of life. And if your superiors feel that you are called also to the priesthood, and you too have that belief that God is calling you, then you move on to the priesthood. But the priesthood and religious life are not necessarily one and the same. And unfortunately, for so many centuries, oftentimes, religious brothers were made to feel like second-class citizens because they weren't priests. They didn't go all the way. They were just brothers or only brothers. And it's such a shame because it really devalues such a beautiful, beautiful vocation in the church. A beautiful vocation. In many monasteries, you always had two groups of monks. You had the lay brother monks and the choir monks. And the choir monks were normally priests or clerics, and their job was to sing the divine office and so forth and all that. And the lay brother, not considered any less than the choir monks, they would attend some of the offices, but most of their work was out in the fields, working with their hands, basically living the life of St. Joseph. in their manual labor and so forth, whether they were fixing things or they were working over in the fields, whatever. And they just lived a very holy life, and the brothers would gather for their prayer times, or the choir monks were praying for their prayer times when they were not together, and they were happy doing that. When the Second Vatican Council hit, there was a reaction against this because they were calling it clericalism, that the choir monks got to go in the choir and the brother monks had to go work, and so they wanted to shove them all together. Again, this wasn't coming from the monks, it was coming from outside the monasteries, and they were being forced to get rid of the choir monks and get rid of the lay brother monks, and everyone's all one big happy family. And a lot of lay brother monks said, we didn't join for that. That's not the religious life we joined. We joined to be brothers. We joined to be out there in the fields doing the hard labor, and it caused many, many monks to leave because they were no longer able to live their vocation as they were called to live it. I bring this up because it's important for the church to once again look at the lay brother and to value their life. It did happen where a lot of religious communities that had lay brothers who were active communities, such as the Franciscans or maybe the Dominicans or so forth, where they decided the lay brothers could no longer be just the brothers around the house. They had to go out and do stuff. So we lost the brother cook, we lost the brother infirmarian, we lost the brother gardener, we lost the brother librarian, we lost the brother who took care of the basics of the life of the community, and they were sent out to go do ministry. You go teach, you go get a degree in this, you get a degree in that. And it emptied the house of the men who cared for the house. Now there was a shared responsibility with the other brothers, but quite honestly, in many religious orders, they started hiring people to do the work the brothers used to do. And the vocation to the lay brother dried up. And people would enter religious life, men would enter religious life, and if they stayed brothers, they were sent on to get a degree to go do some ministry. And they lost the brother porter, they lost the brother gardener, the brother infirmarian, and we had to then stop paying people to do those jobs. That was the work of the brother. Very similar to what happened in the family, when the mother was sent out of the house to go do work. And then the work of raising the children, of creating the home, was lost. And we have all these women in the working field, and we have nobody home caring and nursing and caring for the children, being all that a mother needs to be to the family. And they're out there in the working world. Yeah, okay, you've got careers and everything else, but the most important job of raising a human life and forming a human person has been lost. Right? And we see what that has done to society, where we have children who don't believe that they're loved by their parents. Throughout, I mean, this is a epidemic, an emotional epidemic that's gone on because the family life has been ripped apart by society. But the same has happened in religious life. You see, while it was happening in the families of the mothers being pulled out of the home, so it was happening in religious life. The brothers were being pulled out of the home because the brothers, the lay brothers, were always the mothers in the community. They are the mothers to the community. They're the ones who cook. They're the ones who care. They're the ones who take care of the sick. They're the ones who take care of all the regular needs in a quiet, hidden way. And they do so with love and devotion. The religious brother, the lay brother, is a man who gives himself completely to God, consecrates himself to the Lord, vows himself to live in poverty, chastity, and obedience, enters into the full life of the community, and then becomes a mother to the community. One of the great things I love about our Capuchin life is that the lay brother has always been honored and venerated and held up to such an extreme that we have more brothers who are saints than priests. It was typical that any Capuchin friary, there was typically 12 friars, only 4 of them would be priests, the other 8 were brothers. They were not on the heavy side, the priests, they were on the light side. It was the brothers who lived the life and maintained the life, and the priests were there to administer the sacraments and to go forth preaching and everything else. Not that the other brothers didn't do other things. They had a great effect on society. They were out there begging or doing other things, and had a great impact on the society of the towns that they lived in. Today we celebrate one of those great religious brothers who truly was called by the brothers the mother to the community, and that is Blessed Bernard of Offida, whose picture you see behind me. He is our oldest, longest living Capuchin saint or blessed. He died at the age of 90. He was born in 1604, he died in 1694, entered the Capuchins at the age of 22, and lived a good 68 years as a friar. And 68 of those years he spent doing the things that a mother would do. He was the gardener, he was a cook, he was infirmarian, and so forth. And with such attentiveness, with such care, with such love, did he care for the brothers, that he was just known for this beautiful, beautiful life of holiness and charity. When he was done with whatever task he was doing, he spent most of his time before the Blessed Sacrament, wrapped in ecstasy. There's many stories the friars like to tell about flies landing on his face or his bald head, and he was completely unaware that he was like flies were on him. He just was so wrapped in prayer. It was never even a wave of his hand to get rid of the fly that was sitting on his bald head. He was just wrapped in prayer and contemplation. And I speak about his love. He was the infirmarian. There were days when brothers were sick and were dying, and he would get permission to miss the divine office, and he prayed privately. He prayed the Our Fathers because he was illiterate. But he would spend the entire time at the brothers' bedsides, caring for them, every little need that they had. He would sleep on a stool next to them so they would never be alone, because he cared for them with such tender love. He was just known for this in his life, you know. He spent much time just in prayer, and he had a great devotion to Our Lady as well, which intensified his maternal love for the brothers. St. Maximilian Kolbe spoke about how our consecration to Our Lady should, tough word here, transubstantiate us into the Immaculate. No one's really figured out what he meant by that, but we should be transubstantiated into the Immaculate. I think what he meant by that, from my reading of it, is that we remain who we are, but the love in our hearts is the love of Our Lady, and how we live out for our Lord and for one another. I think that's what he was getting at. It's a very strange term. The substance, the accents remain, the substance changes. The accidents of my person remain, I guess, but the substance is changed into that of Our Lady, right? So we love with the heart of Our Lady. Maybe that's what St. Francis was getting at when he wrote in the Rule as a mother loves and tends to her son according to the flesh, so much more should a friar minor love and tend to his brother according to the Spirit. That we are actually to love one another more than a mother loves their children and cares for them. But more than that, St. Francis sets up maternal love as the model of fraternal love, and that we're supposed to exceed maternal love in our fraternal love. And this is something that Blessed Bernard of Offida did to perfection. When a man enters religious life and takes those vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, much like religious sisters, he's now set aside, well, just like religious sisters, he's set aside for God. He is now something sacred. He is consecrated to the Lord, and therefore everything he does is sacred. Everything he does, offered to the Lord in union with his consecration, has far more meritorious value than it did when he was just a layman. So whether it's cooking, he's not just cooking. He's doing it for the love of our Lord, consecrating that work to the Lord, and as a consecrated person, doing the dishes, or doing the laundry, or gardening, or answering the door, or being an infirmarian, is far more meritorious for the salvation of souls, far more meritorious for the person for whom he's offering it, because of who the consecrated person is who is doing it. Because that person doing it is set aside for the service of God, the glory of God. Not just a layman in the church, and even the word just is not fair there, but not a layman in the church, but one set aside for the sacred, for the holy. Bernard lived that for 68 years of his religious life, until his old age of his 90s, to his dying day, giving himself so completely, so perfectly. I would encourage you to read Pope Francis's document on the religious brother, since it's the only one out there. You're not going to find any other one, and it's going to be very hard to find a book on the religious brother as well. But it is such a high and noble vocation. It is a greater vocation than that of the priesthood. Because as I said, the priesthood, they take promises of obedience to the bishop, promise to pray the divine office, a promise of celibacy, and they are consecrated, set aside, but for the working and salvation of souls, for the functions of the distribution of the sacraments, where a religious brother makes the vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience to live in imitation of Christ, to give himself completely to the Lord as a sacrifice, as a self-gift, so that grace can rain down upon souls. It's a higher vocation. If you read the book To Save 1,000 Souls, Father Brennan, the former rector of the Mount St. Mary Seminary, is very clear that when a young man is discerning religious life, he should, priesthood religious life, he should discern religious life first, because it's a higher vocation. And then if that's not his call, then as a priest. But then after, if he is called to religious life, then after finding that vocation, then within that vocation discern whether one's called to priesthood or not, in that vocation as religious brother. So beautifully, someone finally got it, writing about true discernment. In any event, today, let's ask our beautiful intercession of Blessed Bernard of Offida for an increase in the return of the traditional lay brother, of those men who would step forward, step up, and offer themselves up to God in the beautiful vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, live in that holiness of life, and become true mothers in the gifting of their love to their brothers, and then out to the world from there. May God bless you, and Mary keep you.